Reach across the great divide.
The presentation starts with the phrase, "Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak." And again, I'd like to remind you that if you're a member of the LGBTQ community, that takes a lot more courage to stand up and speak. This is not certainly in reference to me here being able to do this. And then I'd like to play for you once again Rick Mercer's rant.
Every year in this country, 300 kids take their own lives. It is a mind-boggling number. And this past week, one of those kids was Jamie Hubley. He was 15, he was depressed, and he happened to be gay.
You may wonder why I show that to you again. And it's because, unfortunately, that young man was not the last. He was certainly not the first. And we know that as life goes on, many more children in many parts of the world, and certainly here in British Columbia, attempt suicide, and some are successful. That's one of the reasons I'm sure that in 2005, the BC School Trustees Association passed this motion. And the part that stands out to me is that the policy that they're looking for districts to create is one that specifically addresses the safety, concerns of, and prohibits discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered identified youths. And so when we talk about that motion and we look at the date there of 2005, I have to say to myself and I have to say to you, it's now January 2013, and we do not yet have a specific policy, a standalone policy that addresses these issues. We look also at the next slide briefly, and I've shown you this before, on the Coram agreement with the Ministry of Education. As I understand it, there's a little bit of discussion as to whether or not the Coram agreement actually mandates boards to create a standalone or discrete policy. We can debate that for a long time if we like, but I don't really see the need. The point is that the Corams won the agreement, the BC Supreme Court of British Columbia upheld it, and at that point in time, many changes were made. And there were many pilot programs developed. Of course, the grade 12 curriculum was developed and revised. And there was a call at that point in time to review the policy on LGBTQ issues in curricula, and a call for policy on LGBTQ harassment, and policy again that talked about educating administrators, staff, teachers within schools, so that should they be confronted with issues that involve this community, they would have the skills and the package of information to know how to address it. We're talking about the Code of Conduct and the Ministerial Order number 276 that was passed in 2007. Again, I understand that this board has been making motions forward, has been moving forward, and that an ad hoc committee has been established. I am concerned, though, that that committee was established almost a year ago, and I have yet to see a draft policy from this board at this time. There was, though, this week an admin memo that came out to schools. And though, again, I'd like to say that we're pleased at the LTA that the board is holding meetings, I am not pleased to say and not pleased to see that these meetings are being called to discuss whether or not there's a need in our district to have a standalone policy that addresses LGBTQ issues. I thought we were really past that question. I thought we were at a point in time where we understood there was a need for a discrete policy, a standalone policy to address the needs of LGBTQ populations. They are different. We're not talking about a visible minority here. Nobody's ever had to point out to me that I'm 4'11". It's obvious. But if you are a member of the LGBTQ community, many people in part of that community, whether you're staff or students, are trying their best to be inconspicuous. And so when we talk about bringing these students together, we're assuming we actually know who they are, that we are able to gather them, and that they are confident and capable of coming forward to raise their voices to provide advice to this district on whether or not policy is required. I don't see that as a step moving forward. There's another memo that talks about Dave Coutu and possibly a trustee. I would certainly hope there is a trustee coming forward to your school. Again, my concern with this is the focus on deciding whether or not there will in fact be a discrete policy, And the point that I've made earlier in regard to the fact that I think the neediest of students and the most vulnerable of students will be the least likely to come forward or the least likely to speak up. We talk about the BC Human Rights Code, and I'll only bring your attention to number 11, which talks about sexual orientation. We need to understand that when we're talking about policies in regard to this particular community, that sexual orientation, particularly for children in schools, whether they're elementary, middle school, or secondary school, is the most hot topic, the button that everybody likes to push. And if you think you can talk about that in a way that is not going to raise issues of bullying, harassment, and sidelining people, then you are not aware of the facts, and you need to take the time to make yourself aware. It's our opinion that school boards are required to have a clearly written harassment policy stressing the importance of a school culture free from LGBTQ discrimination. And in that policy, we must indicate the range of disciplinary actions and ensure that the policy applies to all and is consistently enforced. We talk about a statement from the BC Ministry of Education, and that educators are aware of how race, culture, ethnicity, sex and gender, sexual orientation, and abilities impact students' access and successes at school. They're also likely to make an individual the target of discrimination, harassment, and violence. And if you are a member of the LGBTQ community, you are all too well aware and familiar with the fact that you have most likely been the target of discrimination, harassment, violence, or all three. There are a series of studies done by the McCreary Center Society. There was one done that I reported on during my last presentation in 2008. There's been a recent update in 2011, and again it focuses on the issues right here in BC on lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered youth. There are a series of findings here. I'm not going to read them all to you. You have them in front of you. One of those shocking, of course, is that 46% of gay and lesbian youth have attempted suicide at least once. That number was first brought forward in 2008 and now is here again in 2011. Because I'm running out of time, I'm going to go straight to my most important point that I want to share with you this evening, and I'll let you read the rest of this report at your leisure. This evening, the LTA Executive Committee passed 2 motions. One is to direct its members to not participate, not organize and not participate in finding students to discuss the need to have a discrete standalone policy. We passed a second motion that says we are willing, able, ready to work with the board to discuss creating a standalone policy. We want to work with you. We believe there's a need to create the policy, but we're long past the point of discussing whether or not a policy is required. And so therefore, I'd like to say to you that as a partner in this issue, we have already held public meetings. We would like to work with you to continue to hold public meetings. We would like to be able to address a motion to our members to work with you within the schools. But please let that work be about creating the policy and not discussing whether or not there is a need to have one. Thank you.
Reach across